All right, so today we are starting chapter 2.11. So we're going to do 2.11. Now, kind of the essential question is, how do the constant functions a, h, and k affect the graph of a quadratic function? Well, we kind of know this already because we went over this in chapter 1. A, the value of a, can do one of two things. It can be either vertical stretch or shrink, and then it can be a reflection across the x-axis, because if a is negative, it's a reflection across the x-axis. And then the value of a will give us a vertical stretch or shrink. So a is either vertical stretch slash shrink, then a less than 0 is a reflection across the x-axis. Now h is a horizontal translation, left or right, and k is a vertical translation, up slash down. So it either moves it up or down. So that's how these kind of affect it. And we went over this a little bit in chapter 1, where we talked about these movements. And that's what we'll be looking at today. Now, our first two are horizontal translation and vertical translation. Now, vertical translation is just what we add to the end, so our k value. Now, if k is positive, we move it up. If k is negative, we move it down. It's kind of straightforward, like we see it. So if it's plus 2, we move it 2 up. If we have minus 2, we move it 2 down, up and down. Now, the horizontal translation is a little bit more confusing because it's kind of the opposite of what we think. So if I see x minus 2, it's moving 2 to the right. And if it's plus 2, it's moving 2 to the left. It's kind of the opposite of what we think. And that's it. So let's look at some of those there. And that's what we're going to mainly look at, is these translations and kind of describing the graph and doing this, kind of like what we did in chapter 1. So we want to describe the transformation of f of x equals x squared, represented by g of x plus 4 squared minus 1. So what happened to go from this to this? What did we do to x squared to get x plus 4 squared minus 1? What was the translation? What was the transformation? So we have two things, and I'm going to get my highlighter out. So I have the plus 4 inside, and we have the minus 1 outside. So the plus 4 inside tells me that I have a horizontal translation of what? Of 4 units to the what? Because since it's plus, it's moving to the left. Now, we also have the minus 1 outside. So the minus 1 outside represents our k, so it's going to be a vertical translation. So inside, something being added or subtracted inside is horizontal. Something being added or subtracted outside the parentheses is vertical. It's going to be a vertical translation of 1 unit where? Since it's minus, it would be down. And that's it. So the plus 4 told me it moved 4 units to the left because it's opposite of what we think. And the minus 1 tells me we move 1 down because vertical is exactly how it looks. Then graph each function. Well, luckily, y'all have a graphing calculator. So if I wanted to, I can hit y equals and type both of these in. And if I type both of those in, I should get these two graphs here. And if we look, we said it moved, so from 0 to 0, it moved 4 units left, 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 1. And that's exactly what it did. All the points moved over 4 and down 1. And that's it. So on the homework, you're going to have to pick which is the correct graph. So I would use the graphing calculator and type in and hit y equals on the graphing keyboard, and then type in for y sub 1, the first one, equals x squared. So we'll have And then for y, so 2 will equal our x plus 4 squared minus 1. And then you can type those into the calculator. So you would hit y equals to get these here and type them in, and then hit graph, and it'll show you what the graph is. So it'll show you exactly the two graphs, and you can select which one it is. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. Now our next one is this one here, g of x equals x minus 3 squared. So here, we don't have an a value. We don't have something in front. And we don't have anything behind it. So we don't have a vertical translate or vertical stretch or shrink. And we don't have a vertical translation. It's not moving up or down. We just have the minus 3 inside. So that means we just have a horizontal translation of what? 3 units to the, well, since it's negative, we might think it's to the left, but it's not. It's the opposite of what we think. So since it's minus 3, it's 3 units to the right. It's moving 3 units to the right. So the minus 3 inside, again, tells us we're either moving to the left or right. Since it's negative, we're moving to the right, a value of 3. Now, again, you can type this into the graphing calculator, and it'll show you your two graphs. So our normal x squared, and then our x minus 3 squared. So for this one here in the graphing calculator, you should already had the first one. You still have y1 is x squared, but y2, I would erase y2 and plug in this new one here. This one in here for y sub 2. So let's look at this next one here. So we have two things going on. We have the minus 2 inside, and we have the minus 2 outside. So our horizontal translation, I'm just going to abbreviate it HT, is, so we have a horizontal translation of what? 2 units to the right. Because again, since it is minus 2, we do the opposite of what we think, which is going to be moving it to the right. So that takes care of what's inside. Now what's outside, we have minus 2, which is our vertical translation. So if we have anything added or subtracted outside, it's a vertical translation of 2 units down. Because again, vertical translation is exactly what it is. Since it's minus 2, it's going to go down 2. And that's all we have to do for this here, describing the transformation. Now, if we were to graph it again, I'd plug it into the graphing calculator and let it graph it for us. So our original function x squared had a point at 0, 0, and we said what? It moved 2 units to the right and down 2. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and we get to this point here. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this one here. Now we're going to look at one more of these here, of these kind of left, right, up, down. Then we'll look at some more of the vertical stretch and shrink and reflections after this. Now, when we look at this here, we see two things. We have the plus 5 inside the parentheses, and we have the plus 1 outside. Now, the plus 5 on the inside, anything added or subtracted inside the parentheses is going to be a horizontal translation. And for this here, we're going to have a horizontal translation of 5 units to the left. Because, again, it's opposite of what we think. Since plus 5, since the 5, we have that plus sign, it means it's moving to the left. And if it was minus, it would have been moving to the right. Now, the plus 1 on the outside tells us we have vertical translation. It's moving up or down. It's going to be moving up or down 1 unit, and it's going to be going up. A vertical translation of 1, we can say unit up. Unit up, because we're adding 1. Vertical translations are just like we see them. Since it's positive, it's going up. If it's negative, it's going down. Now we need to graph it, and again, just like I've been saying, I would go on and just type it into the graphing calculator to get our graph. So it started at 0 here. It's kind of hard to see, but this would be 5 over and 1 up. But these are our two graphs for this here. And I've been using Desmos to get these graphs, so you can use that too, but I would use the graphing calculator because you will be allowed to use a graphing calculator on your test. You will not be allowed to use Desmos on your test. That's all we have to do for this here. So we're going to move on to the next part, reflections in the x-axis or y-axis. So if the negative is outside of the parentheses, it's across the y-axis. If it's inside the parentheses, it's across the x. Now they kind of drop it for this case here. It's not really important, but if it's, because when we square it, it kind of goes away. But if we have something else and we have a negative in front of x inside the parentheses, if x is negative inside these parentheses here, then it's across the y-axis. If it's outside, or like this here, in either one of these cases, it's across the x-axis. And the other two parts, we have horizontal stretch or shrink. Now it's a horizontal stretch away from the y-axis where 0 is less than a is less than 1. And it's horizontal shrink where a is greater than 1. So this here, we're not going to worry about any of this here, horizontal stretch or shrink. We're mainly going to focus on vertical stretch or shrink. And it's a vertical stretch when a is greater than 1. And it's a shrink if it's less than 1 but greater than 0. It's a fraction. So let's look at these here. So these reflections and vertical stretch or shrink. So it's mainly focused right out here, out front. Now if we look out front, we have a negative and a 1/2, and it's all outside the parentheses. So since it's negative, we have a reflection across the x-axis. We have a reflection across the x-axis because of the negative. Now we have a vertical shrink, and we know it's a shrink because it's 1/2. Since it's a fraction, since the number in front of it, the value of a is less than 1, it is a shrink by a factor of 1/2. It's a shrink by a factor of 1/2. And it's a reflection across the x-axis. So it's a reflection across the x-axis, and it's a vertical shrink by 1/2. And that's it. So this is very similar. This should be very similar to what we did in chapter 1 when we talked about these transformations. But now we're mainly focusing on quadratics. Now we need to graph it. And again, I would plug it into the graphing calculator. So the vertical shrink means it's going to be increasing slower. It should look bigger than our original function, and it does. The one in blue is a little bit wider than the original one here, because if you see here at 4, it's already, so the red one at -2 made it to 4. Well, the blue one, it's only made it to -2. It's increasing half as fast. And the reflection caused it to mirror itself or kind of flip down. So now it's going down instead of up. So now we're going to look at this one here. So this one here has kind of two things here up front. We have -3. We have this -3 right here. Right here. So it tells us two things. The negative tells us that we have a reflection across the what? X-axis. And I know it's across the x-axis because it's not inside the parentheses. It's not inside of a set of parentheses. So it's across the x-axis. And the 3 tells us that we have a vertical stretch this time. Factor of 3, because 3 is greater than 1. Because anytime we have a value out here, an a value greater than 1, it doesn't matter that it's negative, it's still greater than 1. It is a vertical stretch. If it's between 0 and 1, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, because it's between 0 and 1, it's a shrink. So here it's a stretch. Now we need to graph it, and again, just like when we did the ones before, just go on and graph it in the graphing calculator. The graphing calculator will do it for us. Now if we look at this here, so again, we still see the same switch. It's flipped over the y-axis, kind of like the one before, because of our reflection across the x-axis. But if you notice, it's increasing at a faster rate. It's skinnier than the red one. So it's a vertical stretch. It's increasing faster along the y-axis. It's going down faster. and that's it. Now this here is a little bit different. We don't have a reflection, and well, the reason I know that is because the 3 is positive. But this time we have -1 inside the parentheses. So we still have two transformations going on here. So let's look at the 3 first. Well, the 3 tells me I have a vertical stretch seems I can't spell stretch by a factor of 3 because we have 3 out in front. We have 3 in place of a, where the a value is going to be. So we've taken care of the 3 because since it's a 3 is greater than 1 and it's outside the parentheses where a should be, it's a vertical stretch. There's a vertical stretch or shrink, but because it's greater than 1, it's a stretch. So that takes care of the 3. Now we have the -1 inside. So if we have something added or subtracted inside of the parentheses, we're talking about a horizontal translation of 1 unit. Now again, since it's minus, we might be tempted to say it's to the left, but no, it's going to the right of 1 unit to the right, or 1 unit right. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. So when we look at the graph, and again, we can put it in the graphing calculator. So again, our vertex was moved 1 unit to the right, so it's at 0, 0. Now it's at 1, 0. And if you notice that it's increasing faster, it's skinnier than the red one, so it has a vertical stretch. Now that brings us to the last one here. Now if you notice something, we've got a little bit more going on here because we have a negative outside, we have +3 inside, and we have +2 outside. So let's just start at the front and move forward. Since we have a negative outside the parentheses, it's a, if I can spell, reflection across what? The x-axis, because it's outside the parentheses. If it had been inside the parentheses, if we had parentheses -x plus 3, so I'll type that out over here. So if we had parentheses -x plus 3, then it would have been across the y. Then it would have been across the y. But since it's on the outside, it's across the x-axis. So that takes care of the first one. Now the second one is the +3 inside. So that'd be a horizontal translation of 3 units. Since it's plus, it's, again, we got to remember it's going to be to the left because our plus is going to be to the left on the inside of the parentheses. Minus inside the parentheses is to the right. So that takes care of the first two, and that leaves us with the +2 on the outside. Well, that's going to be a vertical translation of 2 units up, because vertical translation, the one on the outside, this one here is kind of exactly how we think of it. Since it's +2, it's moving it up 2. And that's it. That is describing the function. Now we've got to pick the graph out. So when we look at this here, so 0, 0, 0, 0. Well, we said it moved 3 units to the left and up 2. So we get our -3, 2. And then it's a reflection across the x-axis, so that means it's going down. And that's all we have to do for this here. So that's the end of 2.11. Now you can go on and start the assignment. The assignment, I just, for some reason, I don't know why, I labeled it in Big Ideas Math as 2.1. I didn't include the extra one, so the assignment for this is 2.1. And the next assignment, because again, we're going to have 2 parts of 2.1, I will assign it probably as 2.12. So it will have a different name. So now that you finished watching this, go on and finish or work on the assignment for chapter 2.1.